for the sake of the next generation of children who would be inspired and, excited like I was by the show Star Trek when I was 5 years old in the 60s. Yes, you need to think about the next generation of their excitement. They're going to become adults and do things and have careers, and they need to be excited and have their curiosity kindled by reality, not by fiction that you saw a bear, these things don't exist, and you saw a weather balloon. It's, that's denial. That's what bureaucracy does to try to silence anomalies, things that are at the end of the curve. Yes, let's make the progress we all know we need to make. Let the conversations begin, the discussion.
According to the evolutionary timeline of the human species we are so familiar with, we have been born with a brain that is capable of abstract thinking, solving problems and calculating, and thus predicting the outcome of our actions. In other words, we are able to create a myriad solid progresses in the field we are interested in by means of learning new stuff that leads us to approach what is already known with a brand new view. Unfortunately, by means of this ability, we, regardless the trigger, are also able to destroy each new thing that crosses our path, but leaves us gazing at the shadows at Plato's cave. Welcome, or welcome back to the Next Truth podcast. Let's ask questions. Some call the mindset of today's scientific pioneers creativity or out of the box thinking, and welcome every step towards a new theory within the field they are conducting their research. But alas, there are still people who view anything new with a destructive judgment and consider this way of approaching known science, in which a myriad thought experiments are being conducted, a collective of beliefs or practices which are mistakenly based on scientific method, also known as pseudoscience. I am your host, Maria Anna van Driel, and today I'm welcoming back the director of the nonprofit Institute for Resonance in Boulder, Colorado, Dr. Simeon Hein, and speak with him about how cold fusion can be connected to Bigfoot sightings and how the classifying of groundbreaking science has the power to stagnate any evolutionary path, regardless if it's biological, mechanical, or on a quantum level. So how are you doing? What happened in the last days? And
Well, I've been walking around the property. I haven't seen anything or heard anything that seems out of the ordinary. But what I've mainly been doing is finishing my book that's coming out in a month that I'm publishing through my publishing company. So I've been pretty much working out here. I haven't seen any. And I have to say it's been pretty cloudy and rainy. That day that we did the interview, that was a brief hailstorm, but that was just a harbinger of things to come. It's been pretty rainy and cloudy almost every day, and cold until yesterday. So those are not optimal conditions for being outside with your night vision equipment. or looking up in the sky, or in their beautiful fields up from here where you have a big view of the sky. But I didn't spend much time outside, so I'm afraid in terms of that sort of research when I'm outside looking for things, that hasn't happened just because it's been too windy and rainy and cold. It finally turned into spring-like weather here. So I'm going to have to wait for my next time out here to do sky watching, kind of searching around. There's a lot of ridge lines along here. And
Yeah.
Reading David Paulides' book, so I've spent a lot of time reading, and there's so much literature about Bigfoot, Sasquatch. So he did two very interesting books, Maria. This is a former police investigator who applies methods of police forensics to Bigfoot investigation. And he wrote a book called The Hoopa Project, which was about, he wanted to look, where's the propensity of Bigfoot interactions? And he narrowed it down to an area in Humboldt County, California, Northern California. He grew up in California and he went back there. He doesn't live there now, but he went back there. And he went to the Hoopa Indian Reservation, where they have a lot of sightings and they're familiar with these creatures going back centuries. And they have a comfortable relationship. They feel that the Bigfoot there are custodians of the forest, and they don't harass them or anything. They're respectful of them. And he interviewed many, many people about their sightings. Hold on a second, I'll get it for you so you can see. He did incredible forensic sketches with a police forensic artist based on these people's testimony of what they encountered. Let me just show it to you really quick.
Okay.
Yeah, hold on a second. So this is one book, The Hoopa Project. And
Yes.
what's really amazing about it, now David Paulides is known more now as someone that does missing persons cases in the United States and Canada. And he had several broadcasts a week on his YouTube channel. These are very strange disappearances. He's not saying it's caused by Bigfoot. He's actually not saying what he thinks is causing it, but they're not where they think there's any criminal activity. They're just where people are around other people and one of the people just is gone. And so he's not saying that this is doing it, but back then, about 10 years ago, he was doing this sort of work where he, let me turn the blur off. That's a little better.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. You can see at the corner of my little hummingbird feeder back there. So you might see that.
I was already wondering what that red space was, but now I can see it. Yes.
That is for hummingbirds, and they will come here. They get used to you. They will show up when you're just standing right there. It's incredible.
Cool.
So this is David's book. I found this. I didn't discover this book until recently, but it's such a great book because he has these incredibly lifelike drawings of what these.
Okay.
I don't want to call them animals because some people think they're people, and some people think they're not people. There's something in the middle. It's why it's such a very interesting topic. But
to
he
me,
has.
That looks like a Neanderthal. What you just showed.
Yeah.
The
Sort of.
before.
He has all the people in here. They've all signed affidavits.
Yes.
Because he's a police officer of that they've seen these. I mean, look at this face. It's kind of, some people have thought maybe it's a Neanderthal of sorts. It's just that there's so much variation in the appearance. These ones in these drawings are more human looking, but there are others where they look more ape-like. And there's others where people describe them looking more cat-like. So there is many varieties of these creatures. They look sort of human, and when they look at you, the witnesses say that they felt like they were looking at a person covered in fur.
Yeah, well, there is, correctly, there is a particular, I don't know if it's a disease, but people grow facial hair very heavily, and on their arms and on their backs. could it be like something like that, and that it is a true humanoid species instead of that it is a quantum traveling with quantum energy? So it is
Yes.
hard for me to wrap my mind around
Yeah.
it, even though it is amazing. It's fascinating to think about it, that it is a possibility. I do have some troubles letting go of that idea that it is a humanoid species
Yeah.
that survived evolution as we know it.
No, I mean, it's a very good question. And the debate is around, is it just a flesh and blood relic
Yeah.
hominoid,
Yes.
or is it a quantum creature? Because as I mentioned in our previous discussion on the 19th, people that have been involved with this for a long time
Yes.
say that they started with the idea that it was either a relative of Gigantopithecus, which is one of the primates from a couple 100,000 years ago in Asia. I don't know if it's ever been found, the bones of Gigantopithecus in North America, but it was found in Asia from 100, 200, 300,000 years ago.
Yes.
So people start with that idea, or that, and in Russia, there's like a subject in, I don't know if it's taught in universities, but they call it hominology, which is that there's different types of humans. And this could be a very rare type of human that's very good at staying disguised and so forth. The reason some of us think it has a sort of quantum aspect to it, I mean, I just think these sketches are incredible. Because again, these people have all signed affidavits, all the 100 witnesses in here, that they saw this, and they would testify under oath that they saw this. I think they look a little more human-like because it's a sketch artist that's used to sketching for police department humans. But nonetheless, Harvey Pratt, who was the sketch artist, is a Native American, I believe, I think from Oklahoma, he said his own tribe believes that these creatures exist too. So this isn't totally foreign to him. The reason that it doesn't seem plausible that it's an ape or a human is what people describe happens around the sightings. People say they just disappear in a flash. They literally, and I haven't finished. This is another book, his second book, Tribal Bigfoot, which is not. It's about other Native American reservations, since there's lots of sightings around Native American reservations. And in North America, Maria, there used to be thousands of tribes with, thousands of languages, and they didn't all communicate with each other, but most of them, the vast majority, had a name for Sasquatch, had a name for the forest people, forest giants. They all had some variety of this. So his second book is about other areas of Native American, and these are thick books filled with witness locations of people who've seen these. So it's amazing to me that such well-written books, I didn't even find out about them until a couple of months ago. I mean, how big is this subject? So the reason that it's very hard to believe that it's just a relic hominoid or a relic primate is that if you talk to the witnesses, they will say they feel strange time loss around these creatures, sense of confusion, missing time, the strange light anomalies, balls of light orbs. And then the creatures can literally disappear in front of your eyes. They can vanish. It's been described by Igor Bortsev, a Russian researcher who was in the United States last year for some conferences. And he said he has met witnesses who said like a curtain of light came down. They were this close to them, just 10 feet away, and they just vanish. Igor Bortsev and Jim Myers, who runs the Sasquatch Outpost in Bailey, Colorado, both after decades of research, and Ron Moorhead, again, who recorded the Sierra Sounds, all three of them believe that this is a being with quantum properties, what they call a paranormal human.
Okay.
A
I find it.
paranormal human, and I know it's hard to understand, and I empathize with your feeling of confusion. None of us know how to deal with this. We haven't had any training, Maria, how to deal with this.
Because when, yes, it makes me confused. And just before, I wasn't quite sure if you were coming online, so I was searching YouTube for Bigfoot and stories and what people find and etc. Their investigations. They send out sounds and they get it back. And my first thoughts are, these are wolves, or these are bears, or deers, big bull deers that are calling out. And like I said, I find it fascinating to think about this, how it is possible that what we see as a biological species is living probably maybe in a Euclidean space as a geometric form, but I have always had this idea: it is biological. It is a human species, not discovered. It is a branch of our species, but in a Neanderthal form. So yes, there is a lot of confusion with me at this moment.
Maria,
I don't know which direction I have to think in.
Everything you're saying makes sense. We all go through this. I went through the similar thinking that you did. I got my PhD in 1992. It's a long time ago. And I'm having to revise my ideas right now about reality. And I think that's healthy. But we haven't been trained for that. We've been socialized by the societies we grew up in that by a certain time, you're taught how reality works. You start in grade school, and then you go to high school, as we call it here, technical school.
Yes.
College, graduate school, you become a professor, and you believe you know how reality works. You're convinced, and so is everyone else around you. And you form a consensus. And the Bigfoot Sasquatch phenomena completely challenges every aspect of that. And I'm feeling it just like you are. This is a new topic for me. As I mentioned in our previous interview 2 weeks ago, even a few years ago, I wasn't really open to this being something more than an undiscovered ape. I believe that. I don't know where they're hiding. Where are they, undiscovered apes? You know, I mean, there's satellites looking down. It doesn't make sense. But back then I thought, well, there are large areas out here. As you go east from here, it just gets wilder and wilder for hundreds of miles, all the way to Yellowstone National Park. This is part of the Yellowstone ecosystem that goes out hundreds of miles from Yellowstone National Park, which is a very large area that has been a national park since the 1880s. You know, it's founded by Teddy Roosevelt. And so there are huge areas out here, but the idea that it's just a flesh and blood creature, there are researchers who believe this to the core, and they will not publish anything about these I would call it the resonant aspects of the phenomenon. I don't want to use the word paranormal because I don't think it's literally paranormal, but it feels like that. But there are people. Grover Krantz was at WSU, where I was a graduate student and an assistant professor. He was only one floor up from me, and he was one of the first academics that I know about in the US to take the subject seriously. He went around this area all the way to the Wallowa Mountains, Umatilla National Forest near Walla Walla, Washington, where there's a college. And he got plaster casts of 15, 18-inch footprints, very large footprints in that area. He believed it was a relic ape, a relic primate, a relative of Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus was huge, 1,000 pounds or something, but it never stood up. There's no evidence it ever walked on two legs. It was just on all fours. Jeff Meldrum still is at Idaho State University. He also believes that it's a relic primate, an anthropoid, as they say in, I guess, the subject of anthropology, and that it's just a flesh and blood creature. I've read his reviews of some of these books when UFOs are mentioned, and he is very, negative and condescending anytime anything paranormal or UFO related is mentioned. But we can't deny the evidence that UFOs are seen around these Bigfoot creatures. Stan Myers wrote a great book called Silent Invasion about an area in Pennsylvania in the 1970s. I don't have it with me this time, but it's another excellent on the ground eyewitness account book where you have hundreds of people saying they saw Bigfoot, they saw UFOs, they saw Bigfoot and UFOs in the same evening. Bigfoot walking around craft or coming out of craft. It doesn't make sense if you look at it from the conventional point of view. And Maria, I have to say, I think these types of conundrums are good for us. They force us to look at things differently. None of us want to do this. We all want it to fit into a box, whether it's crop circles or UFOs. It's got to fit into my box. Most of us are like this. And I'll tell you, the crop circle subject destroyed my idea that things could fit in a box, either man-made, hoax, or UFOs make them. And I realized it was a spectrum. Our minds like to feel confident that we know the answer. And this is another subject that shows us that reality is more complex than our boxes in our mind.
Boxes. The way we think, or most of us try to think outside of this box.
Yeah.
I know you are also giving classes in remote viewing.
Yeah.
Now, I was quickly thinking, have you ever tried remote viewing in order to come in contact with a species like Bigfoot, or should I call it species, because that is indicating that it's something is biological?
No, it's a very good question, Maria, and this is something that I'm developing for future conferences that I'll be holding in Colorado. I got the idea for this about a year ago, and I was in the process of developing these Bigfoot boot camps where we would make telepathic contact with these creatures in hotspots where we know that they have been seen.
Mm-hmm.
I got so many ideas about it. I started writing my book, Dark Matter Monsters, which I'm just editing, and I haven't had time to work quite on putting the conferences together, but I'm going to do that shortly. Here's why I think it will work, and it's a good idea. Because I've done this with Dr. Stephen Greer using CE5 techniques that he developed to communicate with UFOs. And I've been out with him a couple times, initially kind of as a skeptic almost. I mean, you don't think you're going to get together with a group of 20 people, you're going to go outside with your night vision cameras and that something's going to land. But I have seen very hard to explain phenomena when we've gone out on night watches with him. Especially in Wyoming, where we had a very bright craft come right over us a couple miles up. One of the strangest things I've ever seen in my life, bright blue.
What you mean is that you are calling it towards you, or...
Yeah. Yes, you are using remote viewing techniques. Steve Greer calls it RV squared. Remote viewing, remote vectoring. In other words, you're using the skills that you get from RV, which is to look for another channel of information than your conscious mind. And this is what we do in the RV classes. It's a type of resonance, which is, I call it resonant viewing. But Greer realized some time ago, and I spent a lot of time with him, and so I heard his life story several times. He got this idea, or it was broadcast into his mind, that you could not only do RV with UFOs, but you could communicate your location to them so they could show up if they had any time and make a flyby over your group. I'm totally, You're asking them with a group to make a flyby so that you can make some contact as a way to start contact with the other species that exist in our universe. And the idea is to overcome some of the fear that we have of contacting unknown species. So you do it with a group, and before you go out that night, you send out a thought signal a couple hours before, showing them your location in the solar system, on the planet, within your continent and your region. You see, you go down like a funnel into a smaller geographic area with your mind, and you broadcast to some pilot out there in a craft and say, if you have time, I'm just giving you what the protocol says to do. If you have time, we'll be here at a certain time at this location. Why don't you fly by?
Wouldn't it be easier? Wouldn't it be easier to amplify your own energy that you have by nature, and that you are sending that out, including the thought message that you want to send out towards any point in the universe, or any point in the surrounding that you are, but by means of, like I said, amplifying your own energy? I think that is a brighter beacon than when you are mingling all kinds of, thoughts of a group of 20 people that could start to sound incoherent. But that is just my thought.
I'm glad you brought that up, because Greer calls it, I'm using his words, coherent thought sequencing. Coherent thought sequencing. Greer is someone that learned to do meditation quite a while ago. And so the idea is you need to be in that coherent state first before you can really communicate that way. So the thought is not just coming from your conscious mind. It has to come from a deeper level of your subconscious mind too, your unconscious. And when a group of people do that together, it has an amplifying effect. So you're right. We do need the amplification. You get that amplification with a group of people. And you're all thinking along the same frequency. And the idea is it sends out a coherent thought sequence to some extraterrestrial species out there who might be in the area, physically or in a parallel reality, where they can access your frequency, and you're shifting your frequency a little bit, so you kind of meet in the middle. And that means you get to see them when they come by. It doesn't mean that other people would necessarily see them. But I say, in the group I was with in Wyoming, Laramie, it was right after the Rocky Mountain UFO conference, about half the group saw it. You could hear people gasping. About 40 people saw it. The other people were looking in another direction. The object was there for about 10, 15 seconds, moving across the sky. I mean, like a laser beam came out of this object. And this is around 2000, before drones. So if it happened now, my mind, like most of us, would think, was that a drone? I mean, it could be nowadays. You could have a laser mounted on a drone, but this didn't exist in 2000 for civilians. This thing came over and it let go a really bright light that came down to us. People later said, did you get a picture? You don't have time. You're in such a state of shock. You're not thinking about, when you're challenged by something in your environment, it could be animals or any sort of thing that challenges you. You're not thinking about taking pictures immediately. You're in a fight or flight reaction mode. And this is what happens when a large craft comes over. It challenges your sense of reality in such a big way that you don't have time to take a picture. Anyway, it's called coherent thought sequencing, and it's done in a group, and you do it. You sort of get in a semi-meditative state, and then you send out the intention. And I would say, having been out with Steve a couple times, just as someone that was sort of open-minded but skeptical at the same time, I saw something that still to this day I can't explain easily. So I would say it works, and I think you could probably do that with other species too, the Sasquatch or whatever, to create some sort of communication. It'd be a good way for our species to start communicating with other species, since they'll probably stay hidden from us unless we're in the right state of mind.
Do you think that it's possible that there are people in the world who can do so, amplify their own energy and start to be this bright beacon and send out like light communication by themselves? Have you ever witnessed something like that or heard about something like that?
I imagine people could do it, and the reason is I don't have any firsthand knowledge, but as I've mentioned in some of my lectures here and there, I did observe in Japan when I was teaching RV in Tokyo and in Osaka and Fukuoka in Japan in from 2003 to 2008. I went back there 5 times, and I did encounter an individual who did PK, psychokinesis. One of the students in my class was a cancer surgeon, and he knew about this individual who gave demonstrations in a southern area of Japan. I've never talked about it very much because one, I saw him twice, and he did the most amazing things that I, again, had to, unbelievable ability to levitate objects, to move objects around, and to generate energy with his hands that I could feel in my arm like electrical pinpricks. So the PK was absolutely real, and it took me until about this year to understand what he was able to do, having looked into cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction, and the whole area of slow neutrinos.
The piezoelectrical effect, but in the biological form.
Yeah, it's a little more than the piezoelectric effect. It's not just pressure creating electricity, it's actually generating slow neutrinos, cold neutrinos. These are ones that are much slower than come from the sun, but there are a lot of them around. The energy of them is so low that you can't measure it electromagnetically, but they create pressure.
Okay.
And if they're really focused, you can feel it like electricity. So this individual was able to do this. And I imagine he said he had to train himself from as a small child how to do this with his mind. He just got the idea for it, and he got very good at it and gave demonstrations at his place. He asked me not to publicize it because he said that if you get negative people coming there, skeptical people, it affects the energy in the room, and his demonstrations literally were not as good. Things would not levitate as high. Very interesting that our attitude affects reality around us. He didn't want to be tested. He didn't want to prove that this worked. So he asked me not to mention him on radio interviews. And this is 20 years ago now. So I've started to talk about it a little more. But this would be a case of an individual that trained themselves to emit energy with their body, their mind, their palms. And I saw him. The most amazing thing I think he did, and I've mentioned this before to my classes, is he was levitating a cigarette above his hand. It was floating around above his palm. And in my mind, I'm thinking, is there a little string attached to that cigarette since he's about 15 feet away from me? No sooner had I had that thought, is there a little fishing wire, invisible wire, like a magician's trick attached to that cigarette? He did it with yen notes too, paper yen notes. He looks over at me, and the cigarette comes across the room like a torpedo into my shirt pocket.
Serious? No.
Yes, it goes in with force into my shirt pocket. I'm thinking skeptically. He looks at me like he can almost tell what I'm thinking. I'm about 15 feet back from him. There's rows of people up to a counter where he's doing this. My mind is thinking, is something really levitating? I've seen hummingbirds, but I mean, this is a human levitating a cigarette. It comes across the room like a torpedo and goes, as it comes towards me, it makes a right angle turn, goes into my shirt pocket. I still have the cigarette. There were no magnets in it. It's a regular cigarette. That blew my mind literally to see that, and made me realize there are people that can do this, but they don't publicize themselves necessarily because they think that if they get too much attention, it can become negative. It can be, people try to debunk them. And they say that that sort of negative scoffing attitude, that negative attitude, actually affects the space. Now, I think that could be true if we're dealing with what seem to be these relic background neutrinos and someone with their mind's attention can focus the neutrinos. This is how a lot of processes in nature work: cold fusion, low energy, nuclear reaction. There's very interesting people doing research about this right now, Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. It has to do with the whole subject of cold fusion. And it's another topic we can talk about at another time. But yeah, I think there are people that can do that. But until the rest of us are ready to be open to the possibility, and it took me years to be open to the possibility too, having been university trained, if you have too many negative people around it, those witnesses don't want to come forward anymore, the people that can do this. You can see it happen even with the UFO witnesses from the Navy, who actually, there have been hearings, one hearing about 2 weeks ago in the U.S., I think it was it House of Representatives, House Intelligence Committee. We have to actually have governmental legislation now to protect UFO witnesses from the military, because they haven't wanted to come forward, because nobody likes being confronted, being ridiculed.
No.
I have a pretty thick skin to it now. I used to be on a debate team in high school. I don't mind controversy, but I don't claim to have special abilities or, to be arguing for something that, would be that far. I mean, occasionally I've seen things. I mentioned one to you with Stephen Greer, but I'm not going to be the focus of that attack. But that sort of thing doesn't bother me. But you can imagine witnesses to these phenomena, Bigfoot, so forth, what they tell me. And I just spoke to a gentleman who took my RV classes 20 years ago, and he had a sighting, and he told me he was retaking the advanced class just last week. And I asked him, I said, didn't you tell me that you had a sighting with your dad near Woodland Park, Colorado? And he told me the whole story. This thing crossed a 2-lane state highway in exactly 2.5 steps. 2.5 steps on a highway. Okay. And he said, went over a 4-foot barbed wire fence without even stopping. 4-foot barbed wire fence without even slowing down. He said he told, and I'm going to put this in the book, he said he told his 9th grade class the next day he went into class and said, I saw a Bigfoot. Everyone made fun of him. And he regretted having talked about it. So this is the main thing that I think, Maria, that matters. It's not just the phenomena. It's our mindset as a society to accept that there are things, just like you at the beginning of this talk today, our conversation, you said it has to be an ape or it has to be a Neanderthal. We all go through this. I've gone through that. But we have to be able to go through this as a society without directing negative sort of ostracizing behavior towards witnesses that ridicules them to the point where they feel demeaned, where they don't want to talk about it anymore, or they won't talk about it. And we'll have to have more congressional hearings to get the witnesses to come forward, because if you talk to any witnesses, to Bigfoot, to UFOs, to phenomena like this, ghosts and things, they are afraid of the feeling of ridicule from their neighbors. You can read about that in the Bigfoot witnesses. If you listen to them in their podcasts out there where you can hear witnesses talk about this, Sasquatch Chronicles, for example, Wes Germer, who runs that show. It is the same thing. They say they told their neighbors, who said, what was that weird howling sound outside the house last night, if they are all next to the same forest or something. And they said their neighbors laughed at them when they said it could be a Sasquatch. I mean, laughed at them in a serious, mocking way that humans can do to each other. I imagine animals can do that to each other too, though we don't notice it. Humans can be really cruel to each other, and they can be really cruel when you have a belief system that doesn't fit. And as we see what's going on in Eastern Europe right now, it can turn into war, where you don't agree with your neighbors about boundaries or the nation state status of your country. Are you a real country or are you not a real country? It can go different levels of hostility up to outright warfare and complete atrocities.
And I fully agree. Even though if you are not agreeing with somebody's theory or not fully agreeing, or that you have questions about it, still listen to people and have respect for the way
Right.
people think and believe and etc. So, like I said, even though if you are not fully agreeing with something or someone, so but yeah, that is, in my opinion, a normal thing, that you have respect for people. Everything that they say, think, and etc. So, and this equal with all the theories that I come across in the magazines and in the podcasts. Some are amazing, and it occupies my mind for days. And I'm laying in bed and I say, what the heck was he or she saying? Is that true? And then I go on the internet and seek everything out, and etc. etc. So yeah, that is the bottom line, I think, for our species. Have respect for each other.
Yeah, very well said, Maria. I like the way you approach this. You come across a topic like I do, and you say, could that be true? And you start investigating it. Now, not everything we hear turns out to be true. I've been involved in these fields long enough to know there are people that make things up. There are people that like to get attention. So we should be skeptical too. We should be open-minded, but we should look for evidence. I'm not saying believe everything you hear, but the other side of it is, not only can we be cruel to each other if people have belief systems that are different from our own, it can be institutionalized within academia, within science, and within government institutions, where people with different points of view are literally persecuted, driven out and persecuted for their beliefs. This happened to John O'Meara Bockris, who was a cold fusion electrochemist researcher at Texas A&M University, and he replicated the Fleischmann and Pons experiments from the University of Utah in 1989. And he, not only were Fleischmann and Pons completely, attacked for their belief that you could have cold fusion or something like a fusion energy producing reaction, non-chemical, in a tabletop apparatus that you and I can build for about $100. They were eventually let go and driven out of the country. They both left, and they both passed on now. John O'Meara Bockris, who knew Martin Fleischmann, he went to school with him I believe, in the UK. Bockris was from South Africa originally. Bockris reproduces the Fleischmann and Pons reaction and gets the tritium byproduct, which you would expect from the nuclear transmutation. And he's subject to not one, but two university investigations, two accusations of fraud. There was no evidence of fraud, but the mindset of the time is cold fusion can't be real. Therefore, the only way he would get tritium in his fusion reactor vessel would have to be by faking it. There was no evidence, and they withdrew all the accusations, but this guy had to hire an attorney to defend himself. He won both times.
Yes, okay.
But do you see what do you think anyone who follows in his footsteps, his graduate students, Gary, I think it was Gary Taub, wrote an article in Science magazine, which I subscribe to, where he went into this whole accusation that the graduate student must have snuck into the lab at night and put tritium in the water and all. Well, they later realized if you generate tritium in a nuclear reaction, it doesn't look the same as if you pour it in. So it couldn't have been poured in. But the damage is done, is that you persecute people enough, you threaten them with being fired, taking away their benefits, permanent damage to their scientific reputation. They're not going to want to study those subjects again. You're sending a message to everyone else in the community. Don't go off on these fringe topics. Don't go off looking at things. They're not fringe topics, but we think about them that way. Don't look at things in a new way, or you're going to be punished. And if we keep doing this to people, we won't make any scientific progress. And we're going to end up with a Sputnik moment where some other society, where they're more open to some of these topics, let's say China, which I think at one point had 5 RV institutes, 5 institutes studying psychic phenomena.
Okay.
China. They will make a progress in areas of science and we'll be far behind. That's what you call a Sputnik moment. And this is the danger of having this witch hunt mentality. Now, fortunately, Maria, I know I'm talking a lot here, but I feel very passionate about this. It's changing. We had one hearing in Congress about UFOs, UAPs. I'm told that's just the beginning. There are many more hearings planned with witnesses because that hearing was rather superficial and didn't look at any historical evidence. It was just who is working on it now? What do you guys know? And they don't know very much at the moment. But if this trend continues, I'm told there's going to be an article in the New York Times about crop circles, which is something that I worked on for a while and got very close to the New York Times actually having an article on crop circles. I was involved with them. And they canceled it at the last moment around 2011, 2012. They canceled this article because I was involved with it. So, and I never talked about it before, but they were going to have an article, and at the last minute, the business editor decided, I don't like the topic. The article was written, and it had to do with crop circle tours and bringing people to the UK and what we see out there. I was involved in the article. They canceled it the night before it was supposed to go to print. They canceled it. I am told from looking, different sources on the internet last night that there is another New York Times article in the works about crop circles. And now this is encouraging just because the New York Times was very skeptical about UFOs for a long time. Then in 2017, they come out with their article. And some people there must be wondering, well, what else were we skeptical about that might have some scientific merit? It could be crop circles. It could be RV. So what I feel is going on, Maria, is it's opening up now because of the vast weight of the evidence. And thanks to people like you who are brave enough to have a channel devoted to these topics, other people too, that we're coming forward and we're saying we're not afraid of you anymore. You can say what you want. We're going to tell what we've experienced. We're going to say what the historical record is. We're going to look at the evidence. We're going to listen to the witnesses and let the chips fall where they may. We can't hide with our heads in the sand forever. It takes the Navy and the Air Force experiencing these things to want to come forward, at least the Navy so far. We don't know what the U.S. Air Force, why they're so silent about it. But if it takes these naval witnesses who were in the fighter groups from the aircraft carrier exercises on the East and the West Coast saying, we don't like having these objects in our practice areas. It's dangerous to have other objects where we're going at, Mach speed at 600 miles per hour plus. If there's anything out there, we could hit it and we're gone. It's going to cause an aircraft accident. That's what prompted all this. If that's what it takes, Maria, to get these subjects. But the final thing I'll say here, these subjects are all connected. And this is why I decided to write a new book about it, is I realized there's sort of a fundamental level of science behind a lot of these phenomena. Once you start talking about one, it leads to the next, it leads to the next. You can't seal these off. And it's good for this to come out slowly because it means all these phenomena, from UFOs to Bigfoot to people's spontaneous premonitions about their lives that turn out to be accurate, cold fusion, what we've called cold fusion in the past. These are related subjects. There's other states of matter. And it'll eventually lead to, huge levels of new ideas and knowledge and information about who we are, who are we surrounded by in our universe, what other intelligent life forms are around us, Sasquatch, extraterrestrials, interdimensional creatures. And if it has to go this way slowly, bit by bit, it's going to open up from one subject to the next, because I think this is the same principles behind them all. So it's fascinating, and at least we're getting past that state that you've been around, I've been around, where people were afraid to talk about these things. You were attacked. It was called paranormal. It was called fringe science. It was called junk science. I've read it all. I've read every issue of Science magazine since I started subscribing in 1990. One of my graduate advisors said, you should subscribe to Science. I have read every issue since then. So I know what the mainstream thinks here. And they don't like these topics because, it can threaten your career prospects, you know, and I understand that people are concerned about it. You spend years getting a degree, but we have to tell the truth. We can't just be like little puppets in our academic departments just saying what we think we should say so we get tenure and full professorship. I mean, that's a type of corruption. And I'm not going to put up with it. We have to, it's not fair to the witnesses. There are thousands and thousands of witnesses to Sasquatch, to UFOs, to other types of activity. And I don't think it's healthy to keep pushing them away and tell them what you saw was a bear. What you saw was ice crystals. It was reflection of Venus. It was geese. This is all bullshit. Excuse my French. We need to deal with reality. And reality is telling us there's other phenomena out there. We don't need to run away. We should investigate it like we investigate anything else. And if we realize we're surrounded by other types of life that may be good at staying invisible most of the time or out of our perception, it doesn't mean it's not there and it's not getting picked up by very sensitive instruments, by satellites. In the case of Bigfoot, by, you know, thousands of witnesses, you know, all the time, randomly, but over the years, thousands and thousands of witnesses, perhaps hundreds of thousands. Our mind has many defensive mechanisms. It's easy to forget about things. There's a lot of pressure to fit in, to be part of the societies we're part of, but we can't let that distort our sense of reality when people are having these experiences and we're having government hearings about it now. It's going to come out and we're going to realize these were hidden events. People were experiencing them, but they weren't talking about it for a variety of reasons.
I find that very powerfully said. I hear that. I hear this so often after the scenes, after the behind the scenes. I mean, and people talk about the most amazing ideas and fascinating theories and things that they have encountered and witnessed. And then when you ask them, would you come online or would you go forward to into the public with your theory, with your idea? I have read dozens of manuscripts and previous essays, and they are mind-blowing. And then when you read it back, it is all converted into this language that is acceptable in accepted science. And I'm going like, oh my God, you just destroyed the most beautiful theory that you could think of. So yes, I see this so often. This, should I call it fear? I think we should call it fear. So and this equally to Bigfoot, even though I am experiencing this confusion between quantum Bigfoot or a biological Bigfoot. Still, both are equally.
Let me suggest something. You don't have to resolve it. Here's how I deal with this, and I had to use this with crop circles because it didn't make sense for a long time. Don't try to fit it into one or the other, except both at the same time.
Yeah, they are both acceptable.
Just see if your mind can allow both at the same time without resolving it to something that makes sense. And if you can tolerate that gray zone, you'll learn new things over time. It's very tempting to want to say it's a this or a that. It's all quantum or it's all flesh and blood, but it's both. And that is very challenging for our mind to accept. We can accept that there's something paranormal that can do magic things and disappear in front of us. But it's very hard for a flesh and blood being in your mind to be both flesh and blood physical, leave footprints, make thumping sounds, and yell at the top of its lungs in a type of a shriek or a howl that can make your clothing vibrate, and at the same time think that it can disappear in a flash. If you can hold both of those ideas in your mind simultaneously for a while, it's a kind of a good learning exercise to not have to resolve it. Because if you imagine some of the great scientists in the past, they had to do this too. I mean, think of Einstein's thought experiments with himself imagining himself riding on a beam of light. How would a clock move? I mean, the idea that it was time that was the thing that would be variable and the speed of light would be constant. I mean, think what a shift that would be. to imagine that there's relativity with respect to time, that it's bendable, and then the idea that space-time is bendable. You have to kind of put up with these paradoxes for many years, but it leads you to something very interesting, even if it's not initially very comfortable. And Einstein himself was no stranger to being attacked for his ideas. I mean, he was, viciously attacked. I remember a book I came across in the library where I went to college, Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. There was a book I came across called 100 Scientists Against Einstein.
Okay.
It was from 1917 or something like this, or 1920. It was a really old book, and it was all these scientists who were convinced that Einstein was off his rocker. And they wrote this book about why Einstein was wrong about relativity theory, both types of wrong. And we don't remember any of those scientists anymore. We remember Einstein. But anyone who proposes a radically new idea, even from their thought experiments, I mean, Einstein was a patent clerk at one point. He had a lot of time to think. And he just did this on the basis of thought experiments. He imagined himself riding on a beam of light. What would things look like if you were on a beam of light? And even quantum mechanics, Maria, there were people in the US who were accused of being communists based on their belief in quantum mechanics. Edward U. Condon at the University of Colorado, that authored the Condon Report that the Air Force used to end Project Blue Book. He had been stripped of his security clearance in the 1950s, and he was a friend of Einstein.
I heard this before, but did you tell me?
Yeah, I did some research. I live right near the University of Colorado. I can walk over there. He was stripped of his security clearance in the 1950s because they believed quantum mechanics to be a radical scientific theory. And they said, well, if you believe in a radical scientific idea, do you think it's possible you also believe in radical political ideas? And he vociferously argued against that, but they didn't care. And he was stripped of his security clearances just for having been involved with quantum tunneling. Quantum tunneling is not a controversial topic anymore, but at the time, quantum tunneling, the idea that a particle can go through a solid surface and reappear on the other side, it's based on quantum probabilities that things could just appear over there. It's the basis of how modern, microelectronics works is there's going to be a tiny percentage of quantum tunneling where an object will move through a solid surface on the other side. That was considered radical.
Something popped up in my mind, and now you are talking about quantum tunneling. Yes, I know this. What if a geometric species, Bigfoot as geometric and Euclidean, is amplifying its own energy in one way or another? I have no idea how I have to imagine this, but let's say it is possible that it is sending out its own antiparticles through by means of speed, and it pops up in our reality as with density, but it is just a mirrored image of what the original geometric species is.
Right.
Am I talking incoherent here or babbling? No. Or?
I think it has something to do with that, and that's what occurred to me recently, is that the shrieking and howling sounds that it makes, which is very prolonged. If you've heard, there's one thing called the Ohio howl, which was recorded in Ohio. It sounds like a siren going. You can hear it's an animal, but it's so long, and then it comes way back down. You hear all the dogs in the neighborhood start howling. That could be a way of amplifying its own energy and creating a resonant effect, which would allow it to have certain quantum
sound
capacities through sound. Because at some level, sound and energy and electromagnetic energy are all types of resonance at different frequencies. I mean, that's what quantum mechanics tells us. Quantum mechanics tells us in a nutshell that everything has a frequency based on the Planck constant, the smallest interval that we can measure. It's not metaphysics. Everything has a frequency. If there was a species that could modulate its frequency through sound or through other means, it would do exactly what you're saying. And I think that's quite possible. It took me until very recently to realize that's what could be going on with the sounds. It's not just the flesh and blood. Researchers have said it's a type of dominance behavior. It's marking its territory. It's saying, I'm here, get out, so forth. Maybe, but nature doesn't waste anything. Maybe there's other functions of that howling, tree knocking sounds. People, just even around here, there were people who heard this eerie tree knocking sounds, very loud knocks against a tree. No one knows if they're doing it with a stick or they're hitting it with their hand or what, but it's a certain frequency. It can really creep you out if you hear it. And it could be like saying, I've never heard it, but it could be like saying, I'm here to notify other Bigfoot in the area, or some people think, yes, echolocation, right. So now you're thinking, Maria, we have to think outside the box. It's not just what we expect to see. What would nature be doing? Nature doesn't waste anything. It uses the same fundamental principles over and over. It could be like echolocation. It could be generating energy. Witnesses have described them moving from here to there to behind you, just like that, without stepping, just like. Some people say it looks like cartoons when you watch them move at full speed. Also, other types of cryptids. Bigfoot's not the only one, but we won't go into the other ones here, but there are others. And people describe them moving so fast it looks like a cartoon character on Bugs Bunny, just like zoom, 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 like the Roadrunner. Blur, like it's a blur. That could be a psychological effect, or it could be like what you're saying. It's modulating its resonance. Just because you and I don't know how to do it right now doesn't mean someone else didn't figure it out and has some sort of evolutionary.
Last time you were talking about 0-point energy, I do not have it completely in my mind from A to Z, but I was thinking, and that was also involving UFOs and why UFOs are speeding up that rapidly from one point to another. And now you are talking also about how people say have witnessed Bigfoot from one location to another and do not see what is happening inside, in between, in those locations. If by means of this sound, that the vibration inside this dense body is balanced, like 0-point energy, that it is a one single tone, and by means of that one single tone, you can merge this with your mind, your brain frequencies, and in that moment that you can speed up beyond any speed that we understand in this reality. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
It is not completely in my mind from A to Z, but this is just a quick concept brainstorm moment.
No, I like perhaps. Yeah. Right. We're talking about resonance. We're talking about science based on resonance, not just on mechanistic linear ideas. And for a long time, it's been based on linear mechanistic ideas. A leads to B leads to C. But resonance isn't like that. It's instantaneous, and it works more with frequency matching. You know, like two tuning forks, and they're one, you could hit one. If the other one is also at 440 hertz, it's going to start ringing spontaneously. And this seems to be one of the fundamental principles of how the universe works. Now, if you can consciously modulate that resonance, you would end up with cloaking and invisibility and instantaneous communications and ways of juncturing with the electromagnetic field in new ways that we haven't really explored very much. You'd end up with Tesla technology and charge clusters and nuclear transmutation, which is what you find with cold fusion linear reactions. You literally get alchemy. You get elements showing up in your experiment that were not there in the original materials. You get carbon silicone transmuting itself into carbon and tungsten and elements that normally wouldn't just be next to each other. You're going to find them in this resonance type of environment. It penetrates to such a deep level that it actually creates fundamental elements from the periodic table that are not there originally. And just because we don't do this on a mass level of society doesn't mean that there aren't, organizations within our planet, companies that don't know already how to do this, or that other people, entities, creatures haven't figured out how to do this also. Because you're tapping in, you're talking about the 0 point field, you're going to that level where you're going to the subatomic level and you're creating a transmutation process. This is why the cold fusion Leonard community was attacked so much in the beginning, is no one could understand how you could get carbon coming out of pure lead balls, like Takaaki Matsumoto found in Japan, going all the way back to 1989. He was also replicating Martin Fleischmann's work. And Matsumoto was banned from the American Nuclear Society's Fusion Technology and Science magazine. He mentioned ball lightning, which is one of nature's natural sort of coherent energy processes, which I've been studying a lot of recently, and I'll have more to say about that another time, but I've been reading hundreds of cases of ball lightning. It's the type of thing that is seen around Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, and UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings and so forth. It's one of the keys to what's going on with all of this. But where you get this ball lightning, even in laboratory experiments, you get nuclear transmutation. And Matsumoto mentioned this, and Fusion Technology Science magazine banned him from publishing his articles, even though he was one of the top scholars in Japan in nuclear sciences. And Bob Greenyer has done a good job translating his papers, collating them into one paper, Foundations of Nuclear Transmutation and Cold Fusion. I think that's what it was called. Anyway, Bob has been freely distributing this after translating it from Japanese. And Matsumoto, by the way, is still alive in Japan. This is another towering scientific mind that was able to understand Fleischmann and Pond's effect, nuclear transmutation, and how it relates to nature and Maria, dark energy, which is why I'm calling my book Dark Matter Monsters. He was able to put all these together all the way to black holes and ball lightning, and we didn't hear about him until a couple of years ago. Most of us. He was unknown because he was banned from publishing again. And here he is in Japan in 1990, having figured all of this out. In 1990, connection of ball lightning to dark matter to cold fusion to micro black holes based on empirical studies. I'm not talking about a philosopher sitting back in his armchair reading Japanese classics and Western classics. This is someone who saw it in the lab. He saw it in the lab by he saw the micro ball lightning, and he realized it's the same as the ball lightning that he had seen and had been seeing around Japan and other countries, for many years. He puts it all together and realized that that's what cold fusion is. It's a type of micro ball lightning, a type of coherent matter. And we don't hear about him for 30 years because he's banned. He writes one paper after another. And thankfully, again, Bob Greenyer, thanks to them, Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, you can get it from Bob Greenyer's Substack, Remote View Substack website. You can join for almost nothing and download it. And I'm a member of that because he's such a great source of information. And here we have people, and not only that, Maria, they put it together in Russia. Alexander Parkhomov came up with the same thing, working under Soviet science. He comes up with the same ideas and relates it to a lot of these phenomena that we talked about today. He came out of the Soviet remote viewing program and is one of the top nuclear scientists at the time in Soviet Union. and recently published a book called Space, Earth, Human, where he goes into dark matter, cold fusion reactions, psychic phenomena, small black holes, and empirically shows from extensive measurements with tabletop devices he built with surplus Soviet science equipment that we're interacting with dark matter. He's able to show it with these torsion scales and this diffraction grating, a device he built that based on this angle, there's subtle changes in the energy you can measure based on its direction pointed out to the galaxy, just resting on your tabletop. He does this on with a tabletop device built with homemade equipment and Soviet surplus equipment. No one's ever heard of Alexander Parkhomov. So
I definitely want to speak with that person because I am absolutely fascinated by quantum physics, by physics, and the basics of engineering and light and how oh God, I wish I could speak with
you. And here's another person. This person passed away, Ken Shoulders. Kenneth Radford Shoulders was studying the work of Canadian inventor John Hutchinson, who was reproducing Tesla's effects. And John Hutchinson was able to melt metals at room temperature without heat. He was able to fuse a pencil with metal, coins with metal, the so-called Hutchinson fracture samples at room temperature without igniting anything, just from intense magnetism and Tesla coils. Hutchinson had this brilliant mind, and he reproduced Tesla based on Tesla's papers, something which another individual in Canada, David Boutillier, also reproduced recently, just using Tesla's own writings. I mean, you can painstakingly recreate the coils and the devices to generate these pulse discharges at room temperature to completely transmutate, nuclear transmutate metals, and they start melting, not from heat, from nuclear transmutation. Kenneth Radford Shoulders is actually asked to look at Hutchinson and realizes that what Hutchinson's been doing is dealing with these charge clusters, coherent matter, what Kenneth Shoulders eventually called exotic vacuum objects. Vacuum, the vacuum, quantum vacuum. And he discovers all of this. He's pretty much ignored, or maybe it's classified. We don't know, because he disappeared off the radar and he passed away, I think, 2015 or so, 2011. But Kenneth Shoulders is another person like Parkhomov Matsumoto that puts it all together, realizes what makes cold fusion work. So we don't have one, we have three scientists from three different countries, top of their game. Kenneth Radford Shoulders, by the way, invented this technique called masking, which allows electronic circuits to be put together in a circuit board on a micro scale. So he's well known for his work in microelectronics. You have three top-notch researchers, each of which could have won a Nobel Prize. They're that good in their scientific breakthroughs, but you've never heard of them because what we talked about before, it's just the tip of the iceberg. The same hostility that Einstein encountered, these people encountered, and they were dealing with cold fusion. Parkhomov, partly because Soviet Union Russian science got cut off from the West, and Matsumoto was censored. And Kenneth Shoulders, he wrote so many brilliant papers about this, about charge clusters and anti-gravity. There's another reason here, though, Maria, I have to say before we end the discussion today. This work has to do with anti-gravity.
Okay.
In the US, that's a topic that's pretty much the purview of the Air Force. Yes. And they supported all this research. Winston Bostick started studying this in the 50s. And Bostick, in his papers at Princeton, if you look at the very end of, he was creating these little miniature plasmoids in a test tube that looked like spirals of galaxies. And he realized maybe we're dealing with the same principles that make galaxies work, that make little plasmoids self-organize into beautiful shapes in a test tube. He realized that there was an anti-gravity effect, and he was attempting to create peaceful uses of nuclear power after World War II. He was funded by the U.S. Air Force. It says in the grants right there, generous funding from the U.S. Air Force. The recent studies in ball lightning Some of them have been funded by the Air Force. And if you look at these papers, Maria, they are whited out, redacted, half of it, redacted.
Okay.
It's classified. What I'm saying to you, without revealing any classified information, since you're outside the US, I'm kind of kidding with you here. It's classified. It's classified by
I don't believe you on that you are kidding me. I don't believe you.
No, I'm not kidding about being classified. I'm kidding about it having to not say things because you're from another country. I'm kidding about that. But this is all seriousness. We have something in the United States called a national security order.
Yes. Yes.
If you're, and I don't do, just to put it out there, I have no equipment. I'm not experimenting. I'm just working with ideas. I don't have equipment that can reproduce these effects, these Tesla coils. If I did, the US government could come to me and say, Simeon, you're working in an area that affects national security. We're confiscating your equipment and you're prohibited from talking about this subject. It's a gag order. And you're prohibited from saying that we visited you. So
Yes.
the people who've had national security orders slapped on them, we don't know who they are because they're not allowed to say it, but we're told it's been applied, let's say 5,000 times in the last couple decades, 5,000 times. So this holds back scientific progress and education. I do understand a basis for it because it has national security implications. I mean, I understand the logic, but you need to look at the other side, is that you're going to hold the whole society back from making any progress if all of these research that I'm mentioning to you, Matsumoto, Shoulders, Parkham, that sort of thing, in the US, if there are US experimenters doing this, there aren't any. The reason is they've all been slapped with national security orders, because I've heard them talk at conferences and so forth. And if you get too close to figuring all of this out, which is what you and I are talking about, which is the subject of coherent matter and how it produces quantum effects, if you get too close to figuring that, you'll get slapped with a national security order. I believe that's what it's called. And you won't be able to talk about it anymore, which is why are all these inventors outside the US, Canada, Japan, Russia? It's because they either stopped doing it, they agreed to funding from classified sources, and it kills that overclassification. I mean, even Bill Clinton tried to start declassifying, realized there was a classification issue. Going all the way back to the Clinton administration, John Podesta, who was a big advocate of UFO disclosure, one of Clinton's, he was his chief of staff, and he also worked with Hillary Clinton in her presidential run. Remember? He was one of her chief advisors. He also said there's way too much classification, and he worked in the White House. It can go too far where it's overclassified. This is what happened in the Soviet Union in the 1950s. They were ahead of the US in many areas in electronics in the 50s, and they fell behind because of classification within their own society. And this is what pushed the Soviet Union behind everyone else, is overclassification. So to go back to the famous German sociologist Max Weber, who I did my dissertation on in the 90s, he wrote all about the dangers of excessive bureaucracy. He wrote about it from a sociological point of view, that it could kill initiative, it could make life feel meaningless, overly bureaucratic routine, overly organized, no spontaneity. He called it an iron cage. He said the big danger ahead for us is the future could become like an polar icy night of an iron cage. I think those were his words, having read some of Max Weber's books. I think that's exactly what we're talking about here, is over bureaucracy. And the reason you and I are having this conversation today instead of 10 years ago is so much of this was classified, or the people from other countries were not allowed to publish in it or so forth, that we are just finding about it now. And
so what you are now saying is that the last 10 minutes is one big black blur with a beep or something like that. No?
Maria, you are outside. You can do this. You are outside the US and you won't have any danger from your EU saying you can't talk about this. But I'm telling you, all jokes aside, this is a serious issue. I'm not one of them, for cold fusion researchers and inventors. And I do wish that the US government, along with the UFO hearings that they've started to have, would say, do we really need to classify all of this, or is it important to have public education and scientific advancement progress to bring some of it out, declassify ball lightning studies and so forth, to for the sake of progress, cultural and scientific progress. We can't hold everything back with excessive classification. I mean, this is what Bill Clinton said even in the 90s. And I know Obama talked about it too. I don't know if Biden's mentioned it, but if everything gets classified and bureaucratized and segmented, compartmentalized, as it's called it, we won't be able to have an intelligent discussion. And it's only due to the fact of the really excellent research from Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, based in Czechoslovakia, that they've brought forth incredible levels of evidence and research from all over the planet showing how this study of coherent matter, nuclear transmutation, nuclear regeneration with cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction, whatever you'd like to call it, that it's a fundamental aspect of nature. And our understanding of it is really critical to how we survive. And could we be doing a better job with our technology of making it less polluting, less harmful to the environment, more resonantly coherent with our planet, so we don't destroy our planet in the process of being here as humans, right? And that's what it comes down to in a nutshell.
And perhaps these Bigfoot sightings is probably, or it could be, a species pushing us humans, into a direction of having these thoughts. Can we do something more with our technology, with our knowledge? Like you said, like you mentioned, those people being brilliant minds, but being pushed into the back because there might be a possibility that these people could have solved, for instance, climate change, or poverty, or we'll name it. So perhaps these Bigfoot sightings are a spiritual, as well, a spiritual experience for us to have these thoughts and to think outside the box.
Think outside the box. And are we ready to have an intelligent adult discussion on the subject instead of selling the witnesses? So that's where it comes down to, is the society as a whole, not just us here on the conversation and our audience. It's the society as a whole. And I like what I'm seeing right now in our country here in the US Congress, but in your EU Parliament, that we start having hearings and open discussions of these subjects for the sake of the witnesses, so they can tell us what they've seen and don't feel they have to keep this locked in their whole life in the closet. For the sake of the next generation of children who would be inspired and, excited, like I was by the show Star Trek when I was 5 years old in the 60s. Yes, you need to think about the next generation of their excitement. They're going to become adults and do things and have careers, and they need to be excited and have their curiosity kindled by reality, not by fiction, that you saw a bear, these things don't exist, and you saw a weather balloon. It's, that's denial. That's what bureaucracy does to try to silence anomalies, things that are at the end of the curve. But it's those outliers that turn out to matter. COVID was an outlier when it was just infecting 2 people in China or wherever it started, but it was not an outlier anymore. It affected our entire planet. It decimated our economies. We had to stay inside. How much damage did it do? They didn't want to talk about it in China. They tried to put that doctor from that hospital in jail. Remember that? Where the first 30 cases were? And he said, this is something different. This isn't anything we've seen before. And I don't think they did, but they sent the police to his house to arrest him for, what did the charge? Some trumped up charge. He discovered COVID. If we had listened to him a couple of weeks before, we might have prevented the whole thing. So this is what happens when you suppress truth and evidence. All we're saying here is let's look at the evidence. And if it just starts with UFOs and UFO hearings, that's a great place to start. We can get on to Bigfoot and the other phenomena that are around us later, but I think that this is where it needs to go. So
I think that as long as we have this DNA we have now right now, and the way that we think right now, and that these events, these unexplained moments, yet unexplained moments, are still keep going on, I think it will not be pushed aside. There will always be somebody or some people who try to investigate these things, because even though we are pretty destructive species, we are also very curious. So I think this will go on, and one day, just one day, and I think I will not witness this myself in the flesh, but one day we will find this answer of what is Bigfoot, what is a ball lightning, and how are they really connected with each other, with a perfect answer.
No, absolutely. I remember. You're never alone in the woods. But thank you very much, Maria. I appreciate your time. It's a lot of fun.
I wanted to say, and that was a perfect cut, but you stole my moment there for a sec.
No, that's perfect. Very, very well said. I like your conclusion. It's perfect.
I'd like to thank you all for tuning in today on the Next Truth podcast's Let's Ask Questions. Make sure to visit our website. That is www.nexttruth.com. That is nexttruth, all in one word, .com. And let us know what you think about our podcasts. While you're at it, if you find value in this show, we would appreciate a rating on our website in the section Testimonials. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel and share the links on your social media. I am Maria Anna van Driel with the Next Truth. Let's Ask Questions. Be sure to stay tuned for our next episode.